Hi. I thought now that I've completed your grading on the Module 1 Biblical Worldview work, that I would give all of you some broad feedback on your work. I have 3 items. You can see them on the screen in front of you. 2 of them, I think I put the first 2 in nearly everybody's written feedback, but when I'm writing those things, I'm typing, I'm thinking, well, will they hear this the way I mean it? I'm not sure. So those first 2 have to do with the content of the module, and the third one has to do with just how we do these modules. All right, so number 1 is think framework. When you think of a biblical worldview, we're talking about something that is operating all the time in our mind and serving as a framework for how we interpret and understand the world. As such, it takes a lot of work to develop that. And a lot of what's going on in our mind that way was developed through our growing up years. Pablo pointed this out in the discussions that we come with a lot of prejudices. And what we want as biblical Christians, we want our prejudices to be formed by the Bible. Now, on the one hand, that would happen if every time we ran into something, we could call up all the applicable Bible passages. But there's 2 issues there. One, it takes a lot of work to find the applicable Bible passages. Most of our minds aren't big enough to just automatically go out and get the right one and pull it in. And then number 2, there's a lot of things in this world that it's just not obvious what Bible passage applies. One of you cited from the archive of worldview articles that we pointed you to, an article on a biblical worldview in NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. So there's no verse about NAFTA. You have to think about big issues in big ways. So what I'm encouraging you to do is think about a framework that as you seek to make your own worldview more and more biblical, to make your intuitive framework for interpreting the world more and more biblical, think of a framework that you can reach for easily when you're questioning your own biblical worldview. In another video I put up, I suggested the framework of creation, fall, redemption, and new creation. That's not my framework. I cited a book by Albert Walters in there, and even he was taking it from some people before him. You don't have to use that framework. You can develop your own, but think of a framework that lets you think of broad biblical movements and at least become a starting point for responding to everything you run into in the world, but especially what you run into as you do your graduate work, because that's what this is about, a skill you're going to use as you do your graduate work. And that is thinking of everything in terms of the themes of the Bible. So think framework. Number 2, think appreciation as well as opposition. Now, this assignment asked you, the worldview analysis paper, asked you what people think of a biblical worldview. And that kind of set you up for all the negativity in this world. I read an article in the news just this morning that associated Christians with judgmental. It just was automatic. And the author said something, well, Christians aren't the only people who judge. Like, well, of course, Christians are judgmental, but other people are too. And so there's a lot of opposition out there, and a lot of your papers had dramatic passages about the opposition of the world and the flesh and the devil and all that. And that's real. That's real. Don't misunderstand me. It's real. But when I think of the framework I use, creation, fall, redemption, and new creation, I'm bookended on both ends of that are creation, what God intended, and new creation, where God is taking everything. The whole creation is God's creation, and every person is his creation, and every truth is his truth. So as you study in graduate studies, you're going to read some stuff that comes from people who don't necessarily think the way you do about the Bible. They may be Christians with a different slant. They may be non-Christians. Don't just think what's wrong and how I've got to be in opposition or protect myself from them. Think about how God's work shows up in their work. Might get in trouble with this one. A few of you cited evolution as, okay, the Bible teaches creation. Absolutely. God created the world. But evolution has a lot of branches and a lot of ideas. And you know what? The adaptation of organisms, not one organism becoming another, but one organism becoming a better version of itself, that idea is being used very effectively to make better and better medicines. So I can appreciate that aspect of God's creation, and God created organisms to adapt to their environment without throwing out creation or abandoning God. I can appreciate as well as oppose. So think appreciation as well as opposition. And then number 3, research beyond assigned or suggested reading. That was the great failing of these worldview analysis papers. There was a line in the assignment, and I admit that the assignment was a little overly wordy and maybe hard to follow. I'm sorry. But there was a line in the assignment about searching the internet and using words like biblical worldview and critique. You were to find people who disagree with the biblical worldview and see what they say for themselves. There's 2 aspects of this. One that I'm talking about here is on all of your assignments and all of your graduate work, research beyond the reading. That's part of being a graduate student, is looking for more and more information and doing your own research. Then the second aspect of it is, and I put this in a lot of your feedback on your papers, when you're going to cite or say that, people base their thinking on scientific materialism, don't cite Morrow saying people are scientific materialists. Find a scientific materialist and cite him or her, because you don't really understand a position until you understand it from that person's perspective. So think framework for biblical worldview, think appreciation in biblical worldview as well as opposition. In my framework, how does creation and God's intention persist even as the fall messes things up? And then 3, research beyond just what's assigned or suggested. Look for your own resources, and especially as you're moving in and now talking about critical thinking always looks for other perspectives. So be willing to read perspectives that disagree with you. Thanks for your work. Look forward to seeing more of it. Feel free to get in touch with me as you need to.